Hi, good morning. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to today's plenary session on Taiwan Studies outside the Academy. I'm Russel Hsiao from the Department of Communication at the University of Washington. I've been looking forward to this session a lot as we have an excellent lineup of speakers to share the experiences of how to connect the Academy of Taiwan Studies to Taiwan Studies outside of the Academy, Taiwan Studies broadly conceived. What connects us all is this idea that we are concerned with Taiwan. We are interested in the issues that Taiwan is facing. And to overcome these issues, it will be very helpful to connect people who are inside the Academy and practitioners who are outside of the Academy. We also know that there are junior and in some cases senior scholars that are interested in alternative career paths. So let me introduce today's speakers. We have Professor Russel Hsiao from the Global Taiwan Institute in the United States to share experience from GTI. We have Professor Kharis Templeman from the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, United States, to share experience from the outside of academic institutions. We have Professor Lung-chih, who will be joining us online from the National Museum of Taiwan History, Taiwan and Institute of Taiwan History, Academia Sinica, Taiwan, talking about National Museum of Taiwan bringing Taiwan to the world, field report from the NMTH. As a reminder, each speaker will have around 15 minutes, but we will have a little bit of wiggle room this time. All right, so without further ado, let's welcome Professor Russel Hsiao. Professor Hsiao, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Yuan. But you're too kind with that introduction, and I cannot take credit for having the title of a professor. I am a recovering student of the law, and as such has never achieved the status of professorship that the many of you have in this room. But I'm humbled and real privileged to be able to come here and participate in this World Congress of Taiwan Studies, and really it's a real tribute, I think, to the University of Washington for really putting itself on the map of Taiwan studies, as well as the conference organizers for assigning this particular topic as the plenary, so that me and my co-panelists can have a captive audience to share with you our ideas and experiences concerning Taiwan studies outside of the Academy. So, as Yuan alluded to earlier, I am the executive director of the Global Taiwan Institute. We are a fairly new think tank based in Washington, D.C., launched in September of 2016. And so by measures of D.C. think tanks age, we are really an infant at this point. But like I always enjoy describing to people, I think we punch above our weight. And I think given the invitation and the honor of being able to present here today, we have began to start making a mark on the broader Taiwan studies field. So what I'd like to do first is to quickly define what a think tank is. And the definition I would like to use for today's discussion actually comes from the Center for International Private Enterprise, another DC-based think tank organization. And the quote here is, think tanks act as brokers of policy knowledge, centers of research, and incubators of new ideas. As brokers, they channel knowledge between scholars, policymakers, and civil society. As applied researchers, they convert multidisciplinary theory and empirics into insights and recommendations packaged to inform and meet decision makers' needs. As innovators, they expand the policy world's perspectives and possibilities. For example, showing the power of entrepreneurial solutions And at their best, think tanks provide information that is credible, relevant, and easily understood. I think the definition and roles described here by this the CIPE's definition of think tanks is quite comprehensive and fitting because it distinguishes between the different roles that individual researchers in think tanks serve. There isn't simply one. And I think if you can fulfill just one of those roles, you are already a successful think tank organization. Now, more broadly, think tanks operate in the marketplace of ideas that aim to transform ideas into actionable policy. Ideas that are informed by mission, ideology, and other interests. I think put succinctly, we're in a business of linking public ideas with decision makers. It may sound simple, but it is no less important in this exercise to identify who the decision makers are, because ultimately, think tanks aim to influence decisions, whether they are personal, community, or even governmental. However, how we measure impact and influence can be challenging due to the general restrictions on the activities of what a 501c3 think tank, which is the IRS designation for nonprofits, exist. But in general here, just for everyone's informational awareness here, according to IRS, quote, no organization may qualify for Section 501c3 status if a substantial part of its activities is attempting to influence legislation, which is commonly known as lobbying. A 501c3 organization may engage in some lobbying, but too much lobbying activity can risk the loss of that tax-exempt status. And we can go into that in Q&A if you'd like. Think tanks in the United States, in general, are also places where many former policymakers go to get out of the grind of policy making, or perhaps to hang their hat when their party is out of power. But it's also a place where academics go who want to do something perhaps a bit more practical. And increasingly, journalists are contributing to the policy making community. Journalists are increasingly part of the broader policy discussion since they have a real value added to the discussions because they know what is current, they have the investigative skills, and they're also, in general, effective communicators, all essential skill sets for think tank work. Obviously, it is important for us in this, in identifying who the decision makers are, to have a basic understanding of how policy is made and the specific stakeholders of that policy, because different agencies, bureaus, committees, subcommittees have jurisdiction over any given set of issues, and they vary. In other words, there are many players in the broader policy ecosystem. So here, it's important to understand the policy ecosystem, and specifically the Taiwan policy ecosystem. What do we mean by when we say the policy ecosystem? And I'll just point out in the forefront here that they can be vastly different between various capitals. DC is a very different animal from Taipei, Tokyo, Seoul, Berlin. And so it's very distinct in many of these respects, and it requires a very unique understanding of these various ecosystems. But to go over those quickly here, in the interest of time, and we can certainly go into this in much further depth in the Q&A, but we have the executive branch, we have Congress, we have also media, the general public, think tanks, and I would also include academia too. So to get to really the heart of my presentation here today, let me talk a little bit about the reason for the existence of the Global Taiwan Institute. Now, there are over 2,000 think tanks in the United States. Around 8% of those are located in Washington, D.C., where GTI is based. And so one may reasonably ask, why is there even a need for another think tank? Well, first of all, I would say that because we are the only think tank exclusively focused on Taiwan. And second is because it's Washington, D.C. So what are then the fundamental underlying purposes for what GTI does? And I would say, I would explain that there are basically three fundamental underlying purposes that we try to address in our work on Taiwan policy research. And this has traditionally been the way in which U.S. approaches to Taiwan policy has been sort of manifested. The first tendency is that the U.S. approach to Taiwan policy has been exercised, sort of repeated on 4-year cycles, in the sense that there's a focus on Taiwan whenever there's a presidential election on the horizon, or perhaps when there are major arms sales in the works, and so there's the focus of the policymaking community then gets drawn to Taiwan. The second tendency is to treat Taiwan policy as a subset of a China policy, or perhaps even as a secondary issue to be managed. The third tendency is that it is hyper-focused on defense and military issues. To go into a little bit more depth about the three different tendencies, the first of which, again, the tendency to address Taiwan policy in 4-year cycles, is that I think there is an underlying need here to have a more constant monitoring of developments in and about Taiwan. Now, when you sort of turn to Taiwan issues, when there is a presidential election on the horizon, there is a tendency to have a knee-jerk reaction to the developments that are occurring in Taiwan, where you're trying to catch up to sort of 4 years of developments, where I think for many Taiwan watchers, even academics who follow closely developments in Taiwan for academic research, I'm sure that everyone's keenly aware about the dynamic situation within Taiwan and the fluid situation with regards to domestic developments as well as cross-strait relations. So I think a constant monitoring of these developments then makes it easier to understand what are the underlying drivers as well as for decisions and changes in these dynamics, so that any type of reaction to these issues are not drawn by very simplified explanations of what occurred, and I think can be more responsive to these developments. The second is that it treats Taiwan, the tendency to treat Taiwan as a subset of a China policy. Now, this is a function of history and the nature of US-Taiwan relations post-1949, but it also inhibits a more inclusive approach to understanding the value of Taiwan and the assets that it can bring to the broader policy discourse. It creates almost an embedded bias, as well as structural limitations in how Taiwan is considered in the broader policy discussions in Washington, D.C. This is not only reflected in policy, but also in terms of the people and personnel that focus on Taiwan, even within the think tank community. The case in point would be that in many cases where researchers that do focus on Taiwan oftentimes focus on Taiwan as a fraction or a small fraction of their much broader portfolio, which tends to focus on the People's Republic of China. And that's natural in the sense that that focus is that where those resources are allocated. Now, and the third tendency is that there is a sort of a hyper-focused on defense and military issues. Now, that being said, of course, national security is a very essential element of policy, but nevertheless, it creates a sort of a straitjacket, if you will, in terms of how Taiwan policy issues are considered in not only the policy discourse, but within how issues related to Taiwan are framed to the general public in the media, and in just general conversations about Taiwan. I think for Taiwan watchers, I think many of us, and as academics, many obviously understand why Taiwan matters. But I think given the limitations of resources, Europe, perhaps the tendency to focus on Europe over Asia, China over Taiwan, defense over other areas. I think, again, these sort of these structures create challenges in terms of how, again, Taiwan is considered in the broader policy discussion. So this brings me to our programs. And I think this is where we apply the earlier definitions of a think tank and how GTI serves as brokers, applied researchers, and innovators. It comes down to, again, our core programs, which are our bi-weekly publication called the Global Taiwan Brief. We also have regular public seminars that we organize where we convene researchers, think tanks, specialists, as well as current as well as former policy practitioners and government to regularly discuss current developments related to Taiwan. Let me go back quickly to the Global Taiwan Brief. It's a bi-weekly publication that we publish that's entirely online, where we feature analysis as well as informed opinions and contributors from within GTI as well as externally. So, I'll get to this later in our our discussion, but we are always constantly looking for external contributors. So, if any one of you are interested in contributing to a publication, do look me up and we can talk. We also have an annual symposium in the fall, and that's our flagship program, where we convene a day-long conference focused entirely on Taiwan policy discussions, and where we have, we invite, the headlines are often coming from senior government officials within Taiwan as well as within the United States to really, have a in-depth discussion about the future of U.S. policy towards Taiwan. We also offer scholarships as well as fellowships opportunities, scholarships that are designed to enable researchers to do field research in Taiwan, as well as fellowship exchanges for Taiwan-based researchers to spend some time in Washington, D.C. at our office as well. We also have podcasts, which is obviously a very, sort of a pandemic phenomenon where every single think tank has one, or if not, maybe two or three. We have three now. We're actually about to launch our third podcast fairly soon, focused on culture, actually. Our first two are very much more security and foreign policy focused. And so happy to get into any of those programs in detail in the Q&A. Finally, let me conclude with a bit of shameless self-promotion here. What are really the qualities that distinguishes GTI from other think tanks, aside from the fact that we are exclusively focused on Taiwan? And I'll say that there are three qualities, right? The first of which is the frequency of our programs. Frequency has a sort of quality of its own, right? It's often said that quantity has a quality of its own, right? And I would say that frequency has a quality of its own because in terms of the regular frequency of our programs, you create expectations. And when you meet those expectations, you're seen as more reliable. And that sense of reliability of the programs and the content that you produce is a real asset in our community. And it goes to address earlier the sort of tendencies in how we approach Taiwan policy in general. The second quality is the consistency of the quality of our products. And that is something that is also quite essential in terms of meeting expectations, creating the sense of reliability, and also in terms of the credibility of the content that we produce. And the first two of these qualities leads to the third, which is our relevance to the broader policy discussions. Now, all these different types of metrics happen to be metrics that we utilize to try to measure our impact. And as I noted earlier, as a think tank, it's difficult to measure what our impact and our influence are. And those are the three qualities that I would highlight as being how we try to measure and demonstrate our impact. And again, happy to go into details in terms of what are the metrics that we utilize as well. So I think these qualities are essential to the success that we have enjoyed in the relatively short years that we've been operating now, going into our 6th year. But I think that all of this is informed by an understanding of how information is delivered, consumed, and as well as applied in the policymaking world. And now, the importance of our outreach to the academic community comes from also an understanding of the importance of academic research for helping us have a better and deeper and more nuanced understanding about various social, political, economic, and other issues. However, there are limitations, of course, in academic writing. They take too long to be published. And it's in that oftentimes. And in that sense, it impacts its relevance for very quick and high intensity considerations that are often done day to day in the policy world. Earlier, as I mentioned, academic books can take years to get published, and the utility of that research often is affected by that. Oftentimes, academic research are designed to be objective and not tailored to address very specifically interested questions. I think that is the, and one could reasonably ask why, why should they be tailored in such a way? So I think what GTI has offered now is a proof of concept that there is not only the demand in the policy making community to for the information and the products that we provide. And now I think we're right now in the mode of making sure we have enough supply, right? And let me conclude here with a testimonial that we received from Ambassador Jim Moriarty, who is the chairman of the American Institute in Taiwan, because I think it really encapsulates the role and value of GTI and how it's considered within the policymaking community. And the quote here is, "In its short history, GTI has compiled an impressive record of achievement in conducting its core mission of enhancing the relationship between Taiwan and the United States through policy research and programs. GTI's events, articles, and newsletters have deepened policymakers' understanding of Taiwan and enriched the discourse on US-Taiwan relations, making GTI a valuable link between the academic and policy communities in Taiwan and the United States," end quote. And I welcome all of you to join our effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Next, we have Kharis Templeman to share. So the floor is yours.
All right. It's good to see everybody this morning. This, I think, is the first session we've actually had everybody in one room for, so it's good morning. I want to preface my remarks with two things. First, Russell was very modest in kind of describing GTI and its impact. From where I sit, GTI is doing an astounding amount of stuff. They're very prolific, very productive, and I get exhausted just kind of looking at the annual report. I can't imagine how much time and energy it takes to put this together and to run things. So kudos to you, Russell, for really pulling this thing together and seeing it develop in a productive way. The second prefatory remark I want to make is that this is a panel about outside the academy, Taiwan studies outside the academy. I don't generally think of myself as sitting outside the academy, even though I'm at the Hoover Institution, which is kind of weird. It has three components. There's a library and archives, there's faculty research, and then there's a policy element to it as well. And so the Taiwan project now at the Hoover Institution is linked to all three of those pieces. And so my remarks today will talk a little bit about kind of what it's like to straddle, I guess, that divide between inside and outside the academy. So by way of introduction, let me just talk a little bit about the project on Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region at the Hoover Institution. This project is the descendant of a previous project that was over at the Freeman Spogli Institute at Stanford. That's our International Studies Institute. And that was founded in 2005 by Larry Diamond. That project for several years, some of you may know Eric Yu Zhenhua. He was in my role for several years, and then that role went unfilled for several years. And then I was on the job market and desperate to find a position, and Larry scooped me up and put me in this position, and I've been there more or less ever since. So I joined in 2013. The project itself moved over to the Hoover Institution in 2019, and I moved with it. And we've been there ever since. So I can talk a little bit about the kind of previous incarnation of it over at Stanford proper, and then the current incarnation at Hoover, if you'd like. The project goals, what do we do? So the focus here is on, initially was on mostly Taiwan domestic politics, Taiwan democracy. Larry Diamond is a democracy scholar, and so that was his initial interest. And then it always had a cross-strait relations component as well. In more recent years, as Taiwan's kind of position within the U.S. security, set of U.S. security concerns in the region has risen, we've talked a lot more about U.S.-Taiwan relations and the trilateral relationship as well. I should mention also, this project is backed almost entirely by MOFA. So we're supported by the Taiwan government, and you can imagine that we don't suffer any interference from MOFA, but it does raise some considerations about our independence and the kinds of things that we should and should not focus on. Right? And I can talk about those in Q&A as well. So the project components, we have an annual conference like Russell's GTI. We try to make at least part of that public. The theme this year is going to be something related to economic security. So we're going to talk about Taiwan's position in the evolving trading regime of East Asia. We also have a regular speaker series. Some of you have appeared in that, a couple of you at least. That speaker series is intended to highlight new policy relevant scholarship, important topics within our mandate. So for instance, we did a couple things. We did a thing recently on energy policy in Taiwan. Taiwan imports about 98% of its energy requirements. That's a major security vulnerability, as well as a concern for Taiwan meeting its climate goals in the future. We also recently did another event featuring Jessica Drunn, who's a non-resident fellow at the German Marshall Fund, who did a great report on Taiwan's position at the UN and UN Resolution 2758. And so that was a great opportunity to kind of highlight that report and her work on it. So we try to do that as well. And then the third kind of piece of the speaker series is to feature prominent policymakers, so people from the US government or from Taiwan or elsewhere who are directly involved in the policymaking process, and to give them a public platform to speak about what they're doing. So annual conference, speaker series. We also host a lot of visitors. In the pre-COVID times, we had delegations once every couple of months. It seemed like we would welcome someone from Taiwan to the Stanford campus. Since COVID, most of that's moved online. We did just finally welcome another delegation in person a month ago. Eric Ju and the KMT leadership visited Stanford. And we hosted them at the Hoover Institution for some closed-door conversations. So that's the third. And then the other way, we're actually taking a delegation from Stanford to Taiwan in August as well. And that's our project is directly involved in planning that trip. The fourth component is squishier, but I like to think of us as a kind of gateway for people from Taiwan to get access to Stanford and its resources, and vice versa, to help people at Stanford who are interested in Taiwan but don't know who to talk to or how to get there, to overcome some of those hurdles. So those are the four main components. You'll note I haven't really mentioned teaching or students. This is a kind of nice thing to do, but it's not part of our central mandate. And so when I have time and interest, I'll try to engage with students. So I do a fair amount of advising. I teach one course a year. It's not a heavy load, but I get to design the course. It's on Taiwan politics, and it's great fun. And then we, again, in the pre-COVID times, had a couple of internships in Taiwan that we would send a Stanford undergraduate to. And I hope we can revive that as Taiwan opens up again. All right, so that describes the program. I thought I'd offer a couple personal reflections just about my role in this program. Overall, I love this job. It's really great to be at a world-class university, to have access to all the facilities and the faculty and the students there. I'm also able to meet a lot of people from Taiwan on a one-on-one basis. We had Han Guoyu in 2019 come to Stanford at the peak of the Han wave, and so I got to experience firsthand that wave, for better or worse. So I learned a lot from that interaction. Specifically, now that we're over at the Hoover Institution, there is an opportunity to have some real policy impact as well. So currently, I'm part of a working group on semiconductors and semiconductor supply chain and security. I didn't know anything about that, but I've been kind of dragged into that because they need someone because Taiwan is now kind of front and center in that issue. And so we're going to have a report with policy recommendations that we'll send to the Biden administration. And so there's a hope then that by contributing to this sort of work, we can actually influence US policy towards Taiwan. And then I also have a fair amount of time for my own research. I can still maintain a fairly active academic career. And so that's wonderful. I do have, there are a couple kind of longstanding worries about the structure of the program. I'm not in a tenure track job. This is an annual contract. Because of our funding cycle, MOFA grants us an annual appropriation. So we have to apply for that every year. And so it means we're planning on one-year cycles. And if that grant doesn't come through, I'm out of a job. So there's a certain amount of, insecurity there. A second issue here is that because I'm not tenure track faculty, there has to be a tenure faculty member kind of as the principal investigator of the program. And so that means that while I have broad support from that person, I can suggest things. Ultimately, I'm not the principal. And so somebody else is setting the broad direction of the program and prioritize certain things over others. And so so that does set some limitations on what I'm able to do in terms of pushing this program in the direction I think it should go. So at times, and I'll just say this, at times I felt like the program has been an asset to be kind of passed around among different faculty members and institutions rather than as something that is valued in its own right and has a firm kind of consistent place on campus. And that has to do, I think, ultimately with our funding structure and its kind of place at the university. So that's the first part of what I wanted to say. The second is I thought I'd offer some reflections based on my own personal experience in this position about Taiwan studies outside the academy, that in quotes. So the first observation is that the study of Taiwan is pretty niche in academia. And in the US policy world, as Russell has already touched on, Taiwan has traditionally been subsumed under larger questions about the US-China relationship. And so when cross-strait relations are good, when Taipei and Beijing are getting along, there's not a whole lot of the demand for Taiwan expertise and analysis in the US is fairly low. When cross-strait relations are bad, that demand shoots up. And so right now, relations are bad, demand is high. So we're kind of in a sense, a counter-cyclical industry here, right? We're like being a bankruptcy firm in a recession, all right? So right now, there's a lot of demand for, okay, great. A lot of demand for Taiwan expertise, and so a lot of opportunities for our program and for people in the audience to participate in the policymaking process. There's, congressional hearings on Taiwan. There's a fair amount of kind of track 2 dialogue conversations going on about Taiwan, and I encourage you, take advantage of those opportunities if you have them, because your expertise is really valued right now in the U.S. government. That demand, however, is pretty narrow. The U.S. government, as Russell has touched on, has an overwhelming kind of security and military focus. And so what I worry about as a kind of the longer term trend in the field is that other kinds of expertise on the economy or society, those, if they're not in demand, that they'll be lost. We aren't training people to have, we're not rewarding people for specializing in that expertise. And also, just generally, Taiwan might not always be in demand. And so just as a personal anecdote, when I came on the job market during the Ma Ying-jeou era, it was early in the Ma Ying-jeou era, and I interviewed for a bunch of positions, and people said, great, we love your Taiwan stuff, but we don't think Taiwan is that important, or Taiwan is going to become less and less important. And so I managed to land in like the one position where having Taiwan expertise was actually a plus. It's very different now, but we could go back to that world someday. It's not a given that Taiwan will continue to rise in importance in the U.S. And so stabilizing and ensuring a kind of long-term future for Taiwan studies outside the academy, I think, requires the kind of institution building that Russ has been doing. Let me offer a couple other quick observations just about the general kind of position of Taiwan studies within the academy and how Taiwan studies outside the academy can kind of counterbalance some of those trends. The first is a general decline in area expertise within the disciplines, at least in the social science disciplines that I know well. In political science, there's the methods revolution. People prioritize methodology over area expertise. And so at the big R1s, for the most part, area expertise is, it's ancillary. It's nice if you have it, but it's not why you get hired. And so if somebody comes into an R1 position in a political science faculty nowadays and they have Taiwan expertise, it's a complete accident. Second, and related to that, the one big exception in political science, at least, to the area studies decline is China. There are still China positions out there. But here I'll note there's a kind of generational change within the China studies cohorts. So if you trained before 1980 in China studies, you had to go to Taiwan. And so you did your language training there, even if you were specializing in the mainlands. And after 1980, slowly that changed. So people would go directly to the PRC for field work rather than to go to Taiwan. So many of the generation who trained before 1980 kept working on Taiwan, even if they moved over to mainland China studies. And so there's a big cohort of people who are now at or close to retirement age who had Taiwan expertise and could teach Taiwan classes, advise students who were doing work on Taiwan. The younger generations generally don't have that expertise because they could go straight to the PRC, and they're either not interested in Taiwan or they don't have the background. And so I've been worried for a long time about that kind of generational replacement not producing a new generation of Taiwan experts. The second trend I'll note here is that after 1980, PRC students could actually come to the US and get PhDs. And so there was a significant number of Taiwanese or Taiwanese American faculty members who had expertise on Taiwan because they were born there, or they grew up there, they had family there. And that generation is also retiring, and the people who are replacing them are by and large PRC nationals. And so they generally don't have expertise or interest in Taiwan in the same way either. And so there's a whole there's a big shift in academia over the long run, I think, that there's nothing nefarious about it. It's just kind of a secular decline in Taiwan expertise, but it means that what's happening outside of the academy is increasingly important for sustaining Taiwan studies over the long run. Let's see. Finally, I have just a minute left, but let me just touch on some of the implications of these trends. Increasingly, the Taiwan expertise in the academy, at least in political science, is located in policy schools or international or global institutions. I've been really encouraged by the creation of new programs like here at UW. This is on a, it's an endowment. There's a faculty line attached to it. That creates a much more kind of permanent structure that supports Taiwan studies. In addition to UW, UCSD and UCLA have created recently Taiwan studies programs with an endowment behind it. And then there's a lot of tenure track policy positions in the think tank community. In addition to GTI, there's, Brookings and CSIS actually have they have a pretty deep bench on Taiwan policy expertise. And so just to conclude, let me say, as long as Taiwan is a major security interest for the United States, I think outside the academy, we'll continue to have that kind of critical mass of people who know Taiwan, who are able to speak in a policy relevant way about Taiwan issues to the folks in DC. And I'd encourage a lot of you, especially if you're at the graduate student level, to think about that. If you want to stay in Taiwan studies, that's a promising alternative career path. And I'm happy to chat more informally here or in the Q&A about that. So let me stop there. I'll throw it back to the host. Thanks.
Thank you, Kharis. Next, we have Professor Lung-chih, who will be joining us online. Hi, good to see you.
Hello.
Hi,
could you hear me? Okay. Good morning to all the colleagues in Seattle. This is Lung-chih Chang. Right now I'm in Tainan, Taiwan, and it's midnight here. So today I would like to share with you my experience as a museum director at the National Museum of Taiwan History. After the two excellent presentations about the politics and international relations, I think I would like to offer another angle from the museum, the real practice in museum. So what I would like to do in the next 10 to 15 minutes is to give you a short guide of our museum from its founding to its renovation and conclude with some ongoing efforts in terms of internationalization. So let me show my PowerPoint. Our museum was one a young museum compared to other more historic museum, and it is the only museum that features Taiwan history as its major contents. It was founded in 2011. Its vision is Taiwan in the world, and we are using the study of Taiwan as of our foundation to promote cultural identity through dialogue of historical issues, international cooperation, and intellectual property rights. And our mission is to promote co-writing, to enhance cultural preservation, to improve the technique of relic preservation, and conduct exhibition to enhance a social dialogue and cultural diversity. And we are located in Tainan, a historical city of Taiwan. And let me show you some of our historic photos. And this is we located in suburban Tainan, which is called Annan district. Originally, it belongs to Taijiang. The origins of Taiwan history, maybe 400 years ago, and it takes us more than 20 years for the discussion of the founding of the museum to the construction of the museum, all the way to the completion of the museum and opened up to the public in 2011. Our permanent exhibition is entitled Our Land and Our People, and it is a showcase of the the development of Taiwan history all the way from prehistoric time to contemporary era, and without featuring the famous people or regimes, it is actually a social history. The main narrative of our original permanent exhibition is actually based on people's social life and culture. And this photo gives you a general sense of the exhibition hall of our permanent exhibition. It is actually a award-winning design in Taiwan. The operation of the museum can be divided into four major aspects. One is research, and we collected multi-language sources of Taiwan from 16th century to all the way to contemporary period, and published source collections, and along with other translation of foreign language historical sources on Taiwan. And we are also engaged in various topics from related to historical Taiwan, all the way from indigenous history to women's history, social history, and popular culture and education, along with other important subjects. Right now, we have more than 140,000 items of collections, and with different types of sources, and it is well preserved in our depositories, and also become the basis of our exhibitions and all sorts of education efforts. And we have 3 exhibition halls featuring from permanent exhibition to special exhibition, and we have a special exhibition hall for children. And our public service is famous for his caring for handicapped peoples and people with disabilities, and along with all walks of life and our education efforts can be extended to from schools to the general public. And what I would like to feature is our promotion to a new level of organization in October next year, and we now become the third level institution within the Ministry of Cultural Affairs, along with National Museum of Taiwan History, Museum of National History, and also a Museum of Prehistoric Culture. And we have been engaging in renovating our permanent exhibition along with other efforts. And the renovated permanent exhibition is opening to the public last January, and with the following features. One is to extend the theme of our narrative from our land and people to the island of encounters, which put Taiwan in the international scenes, and also talk more about how it become the hub of interactions of people's ideas and interaction between different regions. And we'll also strengthen our narrative from conventional Han people to by incorporating more about the story about indigenous people, and also the importance of multi-ethnic society in different ways of immigration. And we also try to incorporate more plural forms of memories, and work on and talk about how these memories can be representative with different contexts. And another important feature of our renovated permanent exhibition is to focus more on modern and contemporary period. For example, the experience of post-war democratization is also is the new features in our exhibition. And also there's a discussion about important current issues from transitional justice to indigenous affairs, and along with other like social movement and other important issues in contemporary Taiwan. And we also advocated for public history and to promote a co-writing of different people from different walks of life. So that to showcase the importance of democratization, democratic experience, and also the rise of civil society in post-martial law Taiwan. And another important aspect of our operation is the digitalization of efforts. And we now have tried to digitalize our collections and also our research efforts and to make it available through internet and other databases. One important effort is the building of the so-called Taiwan Cultural Memory Bank. It is a multi-platform. It is a multi-platform digital resource aiming to promote co-writing and along with other features. And what we have been doing in the past years, along with the above efforts, is try to respond to the current affairs, such as and by using rapid response collection. For example, we have set up a COVID-19 photography project in collaboration with the Institute of Information Science at Academia Sinica, and to collect people's memories and also people's records of their experience during the COVID-19 pandemics. And overall, I think the Museum of Taiwan History is actually a symbol of how Taiwan study, especially the development of historical study on Taiwan, and how it was translated, become a popular discourse through the museum practice. And we are now engaging in a new stage after the renovation and the promotion, and try to bring our collections and our research and our exhibition to international audiences. And so I think this is also part. These efforts can also be considered as part of Taiwan's ongoing cultural diplomacy and international collaborations. A museum, although it seems to be outside the academia, but we are actually working closely with our colleagues within the academy, both inside and outside Taiwan. And we hope to promote Taiwan studies, and also try to translate it and also communicate it, the latest finding of Taiwan to a more broader audience. So that's conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Professor Chang, for the lovely presentation.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here and good to see everyone is healthy. It's my honor and pleasure to join and speak at the panel, together with my old friends James, Kharis, and new faces, Professor Chang, Mr. Hsiao. My name is Chichi Peng. I received my PhD from the University of California at Santa Barbara in December 2020. I was also former president of the North American Taiwan Studies Association, involved in organizing events and teamwork to promote Taiwan study in North America for at least 8 years. Currently, I'm working as a science officer at Academia Sinica, helping Taiwan government to engage in international organizations and strengthen its transnational collaboration in the Asia-Pacific region. Today, I would like to share with you how I use other platforms, such as the example I'm going to present later, think tanks, or more specifically, the Wilson Center, to study and promote Taiwan. I have a few questions in mind while preparing the talk. For example, is there room for Taiwan studies scholars to develop their expertise in other spaces beyond academia? What are the opportunities out there in think tanks? And also, how can Taiwan study academics contribute to think tank? Let me go right to my main point and conclusion first. Fundamentally, I think tank serves to mediate between the governments, the public through the media, and academics. Policymakers come here to look for in-depth investigation and policy recommendations. Think tanks also have been more adept to flexibility in terms of reaching out to the civil society and to communicate with the public. And think tanks hire or recruit many people with PhDs. It's true that some think tanks become increasingly politicized when they try to gain political and public support, thus contributing to the polarization of the public spheres. Nonetheless, the case I'm going to share today is not the above scenario. The Wilson Center is ranked the top 10 think tanks in the world, according to the 2020 University of Pennsylvania Global Think Tank Index report. It was founded by an act of the U.S. Congress in 1968 and today remains a congressionally supported think tank that has a mission to loyalty to facts beyond partisanship. Its mission is to seek to put knowledge into the public service and to unite the world of ideas to the world of policy by supporting preeminent scholarship. It also seeks to link that scholarship to issues of concerns to officials in Washington. There are 3 departments in the Wilson Center that are interested in or relevant to Taiwan issue: the History and Public Policy Program, the Asian Program, and the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States. My contact is mainly with the History and Public Policy Program. My connection with the center began with the George Washington University UCSB London School of Economy Joint Co-War Study Conference in 2015. I met a professor from George Washington University at the conference who became a member of my dissertation committee in the years that followed. He recommended that I participate in a week-long archives training workshops at the Wilson Center. The full name of the workshop is Summer Institute on Conducting Archival Research, or SICA, which was co-hosted by the Wilson Center and George Washington University. I have been in touch with them since then. The SICA workshop is a total eye-opener. As a historian, the archival capacity building like training workshop was just great. I studied with people around the world, mostly political scientists, international relations scholars, diplomats, archivists, and historians, whose research involved using U.S. government documents. We were told the logics of archival classification, how to find the archives I want, and what to look for when using archives. The week-long camp was completely free. They even provided grants to cover our travel, lodging, and meals during the week. Since I have said that to the point, I must mention a bit more about the difference or the special part between the Wilson Center and other think tanks in the United States. The Wilson Center is the only think tank in the U.S. with a dedicated history program and is a leader in uncovering and publishing historical documentation from around the world through its award-winning digital archive. Considering that more than 250,000 people, students, scholars, school teachers, journalists, and the policy makers visit and access the digital archive each year, its approach has had a transformative effect on historical and international relation research and policy analysis. I learned that the center used to focus on study Cold War communist war archives and history, and therefore did more work on topics related to the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and China. But now it has shifted from the Cold War communist war to the U.S. allies, such as Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, due to difficult access to Chinese archives, as well as the changing U.S.-China power relations and international political dynamic. In 2019, James and I initiated the first ever international symposium on Taiwan's Cold War in Washington's think tank circle at the Wilson Center, in collaboration with Taiwan's National Zhengzi University. The conference highlighted the overlooked agency and subjectivity of Taiwanese voices in the scholarship of Taiwan during the Cold War. We received around 40 abstract proposals and accept around 14 for session presentation. I think the most important implication of this conference is that the study of Taiwanese history is beginning to be discussed on a mainstream American think tank platform. In recent years, the center has initiated a few projects to promote Taiwan study. The first is the Jun and Jen Chu Family Foundation Fellowships in Taiwan Study. It provides research grants to encourage scholarship from around the world to engage in Taiwan studies. Given the challenges facing university budgets and the academic community in the United States and elsewhere, the center's grant programs are essential to promoting scholarship and can help to build next-generation research capacity and expertise in Taiwan study. I was one of the recipients of the center's inaugural fellowship of the Jun and Jen Chu Family Foundation Fellowships in Taiwan Studies in the summer of 2021. The opportunity provided me with access to the center's Library of Congress resources as well as online databases, in addition to research funding. I am in the process of rewriting my PhD thesis into a book. The fellowship helped me a lot in my initial stage. The other is a book launch event. The center also works with scholars in Taiwan study to hold book launch events and other public seminars or to publish short essays. In doing so, the center provides a platform for discussions of new and important historical insight of Taiwan and their public policy relevance. It can amplify the voices of Taiwan studies scholars in media, public policy debates, and popular discussion. This is mainly what I want to share today. Thank you all for listening. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or suggestions. Wish you a great discussion and a nice day.
Now we will proceed to the Q&A session. So if we could first invite the speakers to the front. And let me just briefly explain the Q&A rules. Just you'll raise your hand, and then I will just invite you to raise your question. If you have a question to the speakers, just say directly. If you have a question to Professor Chang, I will try my best to reconstruct your question and then speak through the microphone to Professor Chang. For the in-person speakers, when you respond, please come to the microphone and repeat the question so that people online can hear the question, because often it's from the audience. people who are participating online can't hear. So it will be helpful if you repeated the question and then answer at the spot. All right, with that cleared out of the way, are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, let's start with the back. Yes, you. Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Okay, you can speak directly too. Okay, yes, that is appreciated.
I learned yesterday. So I have a question to consult Kharis and Russel. Both think tanks are trying for bridging Taiwan's importance to policymakers for sure. I understand that. But my question is, as Russel also mentioned, that it's also important to engage with public. So this is what I myself find is difficult to bring the importance of Taiwan to the UK students, public, or even just public as a whole. How do they, as your role, how do you make efforts, or what efforts that you can think of to make to engage more with Americans public to understand Taiwan? Because I would understand that the USA policymakers, of course, know the importance of Taiwan. But what about the public as a general? So that's my question to consult both of you. Thank you.
Right. The question again is, how do organizations like GTI and other organizations outside of Academy engage the public? And that's a very important question. For GTI, we are a very public interfacing institution. And as such, our engagement with the public is a major part of our activities. Our materials are I describe them as products in terms of what we produce, are available for the public and accessible to the public. I would say that 90 to 95% of all of our activities are publicly accessible in the sense that they are available on our website for people to access on and utilize. And as part of the broader public outreach, it's important to engage in conferences that are held in amongst the universities, to engage the student body. And while these are not, the policymaking community per se, it is important to also be able to engage in such discussions to help inform how young scholars understand, frame, and analyze these issues. And so that's part of our broader outreach, to be engaged with the universities in Washington, D.C. primarily, and there are plenty in Washington, D.C., just given the proximity to policymaking that are focused on policy issues. Other efforts include engagement with media, right? And so frequently, now that after 5+ years, we are, as an institution, increasingly receiving more media inquiries from both domestic and international media. And those engagements are also part of our broader outreach efforts to take those inquiries, to respond to them, and to be able to address, what those questions may be, and they can be wide-ranging. So that is also part of the outreach efforts to engage the broader public on these issues. I would say that, for instance, just going back to our programs, again, our public seminars, for instance, they are freely accessible to the general public in Washington, D.C. It's not that all our events are attended only by policymakers and think tankers. In fact, there are people in the general public that regularly attend our events, right? And that is part of our public education efforts in terms of the function that we serve. So I think all these are sort of a range of activities that we utilize to try to to better facilitate public outreach to the general public.
Okay, thanks for bringing that question up, Junyi. Three things. One is I'm going to engage in a little bit of self-criticism here. Before COVID, we weren't very good at this. We would hold events. They would be technically open to the public. We'd get the same dozen people from the public who would come for the free lunch. They tended to be diehard independence activists. They would ask the same question at every event. You probably all know who I'm talking about. And beyond that, we didn't have any public reach, I thought. COVID really helped. It changed the default and it changed the infrastructure. So now our default is we do it publicly. It's going to be online. We're going to record and archive it. And we're going to blast it out to the world. And anybody who has a computer and a Zoom connection can watch it and engage with us. So I think we've gotten a lot better about that, thanks to COVID. Thanks, COVID. The second is I just echo a point that Russell made. Talking to journalists is actually a great way to do this. And I do a fair amount of this, and it may be too much because it'll often be an hour-long conversation with somebody, and then something else will come up, and that report doesn't get written or that article doesn't come out, and you feel like you just wasted an hour of your time, right? There's a lot of that, but think of it as an investment for the long haul. You cultivate these relationships with reporters, and then if there is breaking news or there's some big story they're working on, they'll come to you rather than someone else, and you can really shape how they think about the issue. And then that appears in the Financial Times or the New York Times, wherever. And that does really have a public impact. Related to that, you run the Taiwan Insight, that online magazine. That's a great outlet for policy-relevant writing as well. And so I'd encourage all of you to think about publishing stuff for a general audience, drawing on your personal expertise on Taiwan. And then finally, I do a fair amount of public talks. I'm sure a lot of you do as well, just related to Taiwan issues. I'll get outreach from everything from, I did congressional testimony last year to a high school in New York City. They were having speakers come in remotely and talk about the issue du jour. And so I've done both of those. It takes a lot of time, though, and that's the trade-off. And I think every person has to figure out for themselves whether it's worth it to make that kind of commitment that is pulling you away from the kind of academic things that allow you to publish and to raise your academic profile. So there's a balance there that has to be struck. But that's my initial reaction to that question. Thanks.
I think I saw a hand. Yes, please. Oh, you just okay. Go ahead.
You don't have to repeat. Paul Katz from Academia Sinica. No question for Lung-chih, but it's good to see you, and especially to see the Pikachu doll in the background as well. Sorry. But for Russell and Kharis, my question, especially the comment you made at the end is, I'm also a member of the American Historical Association. They do a great job of working with graduate students to consider other options outside the academy. And I used to, in Taiwan, teach a course called 研究与实习 for first-year MA students, and that was mostly practical training on how to present at conferences. I realize now if I could have taught that course again, I should have asked someone from archives or from a think tank to come and talk to my graduate students about the other options they could pursue apart from being a professor. So my first question for both of you is, how often have you actually gone to graduate seminars and worked with graduate students? And of course, then I can reverse the question to the audience members who teach graduate student introductory seminars, and how often have you invited people from think tanks or archives to present as an option for your graduate students? Okay.
So the question is, how often do we engage with graduate students in our work outside of the academy? So oftentimes those types of invitations are are given due to relationships that you have with professors at graduate seminar, at graduate programs. I've done a few of those where I've been invited to speak with classes at American University or Georgetown, and those are largely because I've interacted with those professors in a professional setting, and they have they teach courses, and therefore, on a class that's related to Taiwan, they would invite me to go and provide a guest lecture on certain issues. I would be happy to do more of those if those invitations are available. Perhaps it could be done. I could be more proactive in trying to solicit such and we're making such offers to provide such services. But that would, I think again that depends on the ability to do so. I am aware that there are actually a lot of programs, a lot of professors who do teach graduate courses where the majority of their classes are taught by guest lecturers outside of by guest lecturers, and I think that is also a focus on Taiwan would be a function in terms of how much is Taiwan a part of that graduate course, and I think the professors in this room that teach graduate courses would, understand better than I would in terms of to what extent, Taiwan is included or a focus of a lot of graduate curriculums. So there might be some limitations there in terms of what those opportunities. But I do really appreciate opportunities to engage with graduate students. I think it's an important part of what I do as what I think of myself as an applied researcher in terms of the translating those knowledge into actionable policy insights and being able to engage with students. I think really help also widen the aperture of my own understanding of these issues, and I think for the most part, many think tanks also considered engagement with students as an important part of their broader responsibilities.
So there are two different types of graduate students that I interact with. MA students, which we actually have a pretty good MA program, really good. I shouldn't downplay it. We got a great MA program on East Asian Studies at Stanford. The Taiwan course I teach draws heavily from that. And so about half the class is master's students, and they're a really interesting eclectic mix. Everything from like Korean and Japanese diplomats to Army FAOs to Stanford undergrads who went on to do an MA and are thinking of doing all kinds of different careers. So I don't know what kind of career advice I can give them other than to talk about what you can do with some Taiwan expertise. The PhD student interaction is a lot less, and they usually will come to me about something they're interested in related to Taiwan. And so I can think of a handful of students that I've interacted with over my time at Stanford who are in a PhD program. In Taiwan, it's a different environment because you come in as a kind of outside lecturer, and then I've had opportunities to speak to graduate student classes there, and there I think the impact is probably maybe more significant. There are some trade-offs there as well, though. You could spend an entire 2-week trip to Taiwan just speaking to graduate classes around the island, and there are other things I need to do when I'm there. So the solution is to spend more time there, I think. But yeah, so there's a fair amount of interaction. But if you have students or classes you'd like either of us to speak to, please let us know. I think both of us are willing to do that. And in the Zoom world, we can do a virtual event, and that's not a huge time commitment or cost commitment. So I'd encourage us to think more about that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very excellent suggestion, because I teach graduate students myself from time to time, and I think it's an excellent opportunity to bring Taiwan and or think tanks alternative ways of thinking about academia to the classrooms to grad students. I think that is really valuable. I saw a hand over there. Yes. Yeah. You want to come forward? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's the hybrid. It's the hybrid mode now.
Thanks. And thanks also to all three of you for the incredible work that you do actually with the public. I've been to events at Hoover. I've been to events, lots of events at GTI. I am dying to go to the Taiwan Museum of History in Tainan. So, you know, good on you for taking this outside the academy and bringing it to a bigger world. I have two related questions, which are for you guys, but also I think for the audience and for this conference more broadly, which is the deterioration in U.S. PRC relations and the kind of China's increasing self-isolation, which is being rationalized by reference to COVID, but which is actually way bigger than COVID, is creating two phenomena that I would love for you guys to comment on, both from the angle of how much you think they're happening and from the angle of what you think we ought to do about it. And the first one is, does the fact that China is currently closed, and it's not clear when it will reopen, and it's really not clear when it will reopen for serious academic work, especially field research in any remotely sensitive subject area. Is that going to reverse in any way the trends, Kharis, that you were describing about scholarly expertise about Taiwan within the China watching community? So can we expect a new wave of people coming into our profession who actually have been in Taiwan because China's closed? The other thing that I think almost inevitably is going to do is it's going to drive China in an even more, or China studies in an even more quantitative direction, because people won't be able to do field research, but they will be able to work with data. So that's kind of one set of topics and a question. And then the other one is the non-Taiwan experts who are now piling into the Taiwan studies field. So these are China-trained people who think because they understand the People's Republic of China, they are already like 90% of the way to being Taiwan experts. I don't know. I think I might have just revealed some feelings right there. And I guess my question is, you know, what are we supposed to do about that? How do we counter that? Russell, how do you avoid having GTI sort of overtaken by, you know, China security people who pontificate about Taiwan with very little knowledge? You know, Kharis, you and I have dealt with this a little bit in your institution. And then I think all of us are just grappling with how to preserve our own position as actual experts when, you know, there's a kind of desperation among China watchers to find something that they can do, that for which they can do field research. And so they're kind of like horning in on our stuff. So I just wonder, like, other people dealing with this? And if so, you know, what's the sort of Taiwan studies community's response to that? Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. Maybe we'll start with Professor Chang and then Russell and then Kharis. So Professor Chang, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thank you very much for the comments and the question. And as a practicing historian and now working in the museum, I do share your feeling about the China factors in both in terms of politics and academia. And because for now, practically speaking, I cannot have any formal contacts with my Chinese colleague on the mainland, and I also cannot go to China, go to museums in China for any collaboration or exchange because of the title, because we are a national museum of Taiwan history, which cannot be recognized by official discourse in the PRC. Having said that, I think we still have a lot of indirect contact and communication and information sharing, if not expertise sharing, with some more open-minded and transnational experts in the field of museum studies and for that matters. And that's I think that's one thing. And the other, I think this question is more appropriate for especially those who are in the fields of international relations and politics to answer, because I think right now we don't have a lot of opportunity to talk about cultural diplomacy and the role of museum and other institutions in how they're going to play in Taiwan's cultural diplomacy. I think the discussion has just begun. So we are also preparing and also discussing how to respond to the this new situation and how to bring Taiwan to the world by using our museum expertise and also try to translate and also communicate the latest scholarly development in Taiwan, and especially in Taiwan historical studies. So I think it will be a joint effort. And I myself also a subscriber to the GTI newsletters and also watching closely to a lot of public seminars and conferences, both at Hoover Institution and in GTI. So I think hopefully we could have another ways of collaborating or networking between different natures of institutions and organizations. Thank you.
Whichever. Why don't you go?
Thank you very much for those questions, Shelley. And just before I respond, just want to applaud you in terms of really the highly relevant academic research that you do that really help to inform the policymaking community, on Taiwan. And so really, in terms of academic research that has really had a strong impact, I think your work really stands out. So I think thank you very much for all that you do. With regards to your two questions, the first of which is whether or not can we expect a new wave of Taiwan-focused expertise to develop as a result of China's self-isolation? I think we are seeing that. And just something that is anecdotal, but just real directly related to GTI is that several of our interns, who are part of programs that were supposed to go to China, and but as a result of the physical borders being shut down, but also increasingly a more hostile attitudes with regards to the PRC's closing its borders, they've opted to go and conduct their studies for their programs in Taiwan, and as a result have only deepened their interest and appreciation for pursuing a career related to Taiwan. And I think we have at least two of our interns who were planning to be going to the PRC, but then had ultimately decided to go to Taiwan instead, and consequently, after their experience, wanted to pursue a professional career focused on Taiwan studies. And I think that's we are in that process right now, where I think there's a increasingly growing body of students who have similar, I think, experiences and interests in now pursuing their Taiwan studies. And I think more broadly speaking, also this is also being facilitated at a very at a policy level too, as well, of strengthening education and cultural programs between the United States and Taiwan. I think there is a recognition at the policy level that there are increasingly more opportunities and importance of deepening these types of cultural and educational exchanges between the United States and Taiwan, because of in part growing concerns with regards to the PRC government's influence on cultural and educational organizations within the United States, and how that impacts academic freedom in the U.S. But still the need, of course, to encourage the Mandarin language skills, and what better facilitator of that outside of the PRC than Taiwan. And so there have been a number of initiatives that have been put forward between the United States and Taiwan to establish Mandarin learning centers throughout the United States, and I think Taiwan's doing that across the world, and I think that's an excellent initiative, and these are being facilitated at a governmental level by the two governments, and I think we can expect to see more of those efforts more of those efforts going forward. With regards to the encroachment of the sort of China experts into the Taiwan and the Taiwan field, I think as an institution, we also act as a gatekeeper in a way. So, in our approach in terms of addressing issues that are, related to Taiwan, sure, there is I think there is in part a need to have the perspectives of some of these China experts to be able to provide and inform what Beijing's, perspectives are on such issues. But we are a Taiwan-centered policy research institution, and first and foremost, we would like to feature perspectives from Taiwan with regards to these and people, experts who have a knowledge and experience, first and foremost with Taiwan, to better inform our. Oh, okay, and then there's light. Okay, on these issues. So, how we, from the articles that we publish on our public through our publications, through the public seminars that we organize, I think there's a conscious effort on our part to be able to, again, feature more Taiwan centered perspectives on these various issues. But there is also, I would say, I do want to acknowledge that there is also a need in that conversation to have people who are, China experts to offer, their knowledge and expertise on Beijing's perspectives on some of these issues as well. So I think I'm going more like, more of a concentric circle where Taiwan is a focus, but yeah, there's a part of that in terms of where China should be a part of that conversation too. So thank you.
Do I have time to respond? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so great question. The first, will we see a reversal of trends? Will we see a kind of spike in Taiwan expertise in the next year to 5 years to 10 years? We might. There's actually a precedent for this. So right around Tiananmen, 1989, there were a bunch of students who wanted to go to China and ended up going to Taiwan instead. Nathan Batta was one. You were another. Okay. So that is how you became enlightened. We may well see that again.
Already enlightened, but I was like backsliding.
Okay. So, and I see this anecdotally as well as Russell among the students that I interact with, both at the undergraduate level. They couldn't get into China, so a couple of them just found ways to get to Taiwan and take half their classes there over the year. At the MA level, the same thing. Students, they're not sure they can get into China, so they're going to Taiwan. That will set them on a different path, I think, for many of them. And then even at the PhD level, I have a Shady at Michigan who had a Fulbright to go to China and do field work, they pulled that out from him, from under him, and they said, you can go to Taiwan instead. So he did. And so that meant his project had to change pretty dramatically, and he was doing mostly archival work, but he spent that year in Taiwan instead of in the PRC. So I suspect we will see kind of an increase in the overall pool of people who have real expertise on Taiwan in the next generation. Thanks, China. The other is, will China studies become even more quantitative? Probably, but there's three other things I'd point to. One is Pekingology is becoming more and more important again. So the kind of reading of the tea leaves in Beijing and who's on the front page of Renmin Ribao and how they're positioned, that kind of older style of scholarship is actually potentially coming back into vogue again. And in particular on kind of official policy pronouncements coming out of Beijing about Taiwan. I wish we had more of that. I wish we had people actually tracking very carefully, because in the absence of that kind of detailed knowledge, we have people just cherry picking, things out of Xi Jinping's latest speech and saying, he's coming across the strait tomorrow. Look at the speech to the PLA, right? And it's, if you just parachute in and take three talking points out of his speech, you may think that. But so I'm cautiously optimistic we're actually going to see a revival of that sort of study. Second, the engagement with PRC scholars who are actually in the PRC or who can come out of the PRC, that's becoming more and more important too in the China field. And so the kind of cross-cultural and cross-Pacific collaboration that we've done some of, I think is going to become more important. It's exceptionally important to understand the PRC's view on Taiwan now, to talk to PRC scholars who specialize in the study of cross-strait relations in Taiwan, just to understand how the leadership and how the broader academic community in China is thinking about the Taiwan issue. So if you have opportunities to engage with your PRC peers on Taiwan issues, I would jump at those, and they can learn from you and you can learn from them. I think we should do as much of that as possible. And then the third is just to reiterate something Russell said. When you've got a bunch of China experts or non-China experts piling into this space, it's really incumbent upon us not just to elevate our own voices, but Taiwan voices, right? They're the authorities on what's happening in Taiwan, what Taiwan's interests are. And so to the extent we have the infrastructure to give them a platform to speak to those non-experts who are trying to make policy, use that platform for good, is what I would argue. So with that, I'll wrap it up and turn it over.
Thanks all. Given the time, I think that concludes our session. Let's give another round of applause to the presenters, Professor Chang online, and thank you all for participating. So we will provide refreshments, I think, in this room. So if you want to stick around, get a drink, they're over there, and we'll continue our sessions at 11. Thank you.